He was one of America's most respected neuroscientists, a man the U.S. government trusted to probe the secrets of the human brain. But one night, he sealed himself inside a soundproof tank, drifted weightless in total darkness, and emerged claiming he had seen beyond the boundaries of reality itself. His name was Dr. John C. Lilly, and what he said afterward would terrify even his closest colleagues. "You won't believe what I saw," he whispered to a friend. At first, everyone assumed he'd lost his mind. Yet years later, discoveries in physics and neuroscience began to reveal strange echoes of what Lilly had once described. What if he hadn't gone insane? What if he glimpsed something we're not meant to see? Something that shapes the coincidences of our lives. Stay with us, because what he brought back from that other side might just change the way you see reality forever. The boy who refused the ban. It all began, as many obsessions do, with defiance. John Cunningham Lilly was never the kind of man who followed the path laid out for him. Born in 1915 into a wealthy family in St. Paul, Minnesota, he was destined to become a banker like his father, a respectable heir to a life of comfort. But from the very start, young Lilly was drawn to something far stranger. While other children played outside, he spent his days in a makeshift lab, surrounded by glass tubes, wires, and chemicals he barely understood. One afternoon, a small explosion rattled the room, shattering windows and covering him in soot. His parents rushed in, horrified, only to find him laughing. The experiment had failed, but the mystery behind it thrilled him. He didn't want success. He wanted to understand why things worked the way they did. That craving for understanding grew into something more dangerous than curiosity. It became a rebellion against everything ordinary. When his older brother died in a plane crash, the tragedy scarred him deeply. Lilly couldn't accept that a person's consciousness, the very spark that makes us us, could simply vanish. He began to wonder what life really was, where thought came from, and whether death was an ending or merely a doorway. At 17, his father tried to steer him back toward the family destiny. The bank was waiting, the legacy secure. But John refused. "I'm not interested in money," he said quietly. "I'm interested in what makes us alive." Those words ended his place in the family future. From that day, he was on his own. He enrolled at Dartmouth College to study biology, and quickly became known for his brilliance and his recklessness. He worked through the night, slept in a lab, and often used himself as a test subject in dangerous experiments. His professors called him gifted. His classmates called him obsessed. To Lilly, they were both right. Knowledge demanded risk. Then, one rainy afternoon, something happened that changed his life forever. While driving with his father, their car skidded off the road and crashed into a ditch. The vehicle was destroyed, but both men climbed out without a single serious injury. His father called it luck. Lilly didn't. He believed something had intervened, a hidden intelligence behind coincidence. It was his first encounter with what he would later call the Earth Coincidence Control Office, a mysterious force that seemed to arrange reality with purpose. For now, though he was still a scientist, not yet a mystic, at the University of Pennsylvania, he dove into the study of biophysics, believing he was simply unlocking the chemistry of the brain. But in truth, he was preparing to step far beyond science, into a realm no one had ever mapped before, the uncharted frontier of the human mind, from pen to the peak of neuroscience. When John C. Lilly arrived at the University of Pennsylvania in the early 1940s, the air was electric with innovation. The Second World War had turned science into a weapon of survival, and brilliant young minds were racing to unlock discoveries that could change the course of history. But Lilly's curiosity wasn't driven by patriotism or power. It was driven by a deeper question. He didn't want to build better machines. He wanted to understand the mind itself. At Penn's Department of Physiology, he met Dr. H. Cuthbert Bazette, a brilliant yet unyielding mentor who lived by one rule: never perform an experiment on another person that you wouldn't endure yourself. Lilly took those words to heart, perhaps too literally. He subjected himself to pressure chambers, oxygen deprivation, and isolation tests, all in pursuit of first-hand understanding. To him, science wasn't about comfort. It was about revelation. His engineering background made him different from other biologists. He combined precision mechanics with biological insight, designing instruments that could measure what no one had ever seen before. His first major invention, the electrical capacitance diaphragm manometer, allowed scientists to record blood pressure changes with unprecedented accuracy. It was elegant, efficient, and it caught the attention of both academic and military researchers. But Lilly's true obsession was far more elusive: the living brain. Under Dr. Britton Chance at the Eldridge Reeves Johnson Foundation, he developed new ways to monitor brain activity in real time. His early electrocorticography experiments, placing electrodes directly on the cortex, revealed astonishing patterns, electrical signatures that flickered with pain, pleasure, and awareness. These findings laid some of the earliest groundwork for what we now call brain mapping. During the war, Lilly's research took on a darker edge. Working with the U.S. Air Force, he studied how the human body and mind responded to the extremes of altitude, spin, and oxygen loss. He didn't just observe, he volunteered himself, pushing his body until he blacked out in centrifuges and pressure tanks. In those moments, drifting between consciousness and nothingness, he sensed that the mind could stretch and bend in ways no textbook could explain. After the war, Lilly remained at Penn, determined to go further. He pioneered a new technique to record the brain's electrical signals without surgery, implanting microscopic metal tubes through the scalp so electrodes could reach the brain painlessly. It was revolutionary. His papers on brain stimulation and neural recording earned worldwide attention. But not everyone was inspired by his discoveries. Some saw darker possibilities. Government agencies approached him with offers, funding in exchange for classified research into psychological control, interrogation, and manipulation. Lilly refused. Science, he believed, was meant to liberate the mind, not enslave it. That decision came at a cost. Grants vanished. Collaborators withdrew. His reputation dimmed in the corridors of power. But Lilly didn't regret it. He began to see the scientific establishment as a cage, limited by politics, profit, and fear. The mind, he thought, was not a machine to be programmed. It was an entire universe waiting to be explored. By the late 1940s, John C. Lilly stood at the peak of neuroscience, brilliant, respected, but restless. Even as he mapped the brain's electrical storms, he knew something was missing. Equations couldn't explain consciousness. Instruments couldn't measure awareness. And so, the deeper he went into science, the more he began to sense that the truth he was chasing lay somewhere beyond it. A truth that would soon lead him into a place where science, philosophy, and madness would collide. The birth of the isolation Tao. N.K. By the early 1950s, John C. Lilly had already carved out a brilliant career in neuroscience. But for him, the wiring of the brain was no longer enough. He wasn't satisfied with mapping neurons or measuring electric pulses. He wanted to go deeper. What was consciousness when everything external was stripped away? Was it something the brain created? Or something far older, something that existed beyond it? Those questions consumed him, and soon gave birth to an idea that would change his life and divide science for decades. Lilly began designing a device that could completely isolate the mind from the outside world. No sound, no sight, no touch, no gravity. A chamber filled with warm salt water, where a person could float weightlessly in total darkness and silence. His goal was radical. Remove every trace of sensory input and watch what remained when the brain was left utterly alone. Most scientists called it dangerous. They warned it could trigger madness, hallucinations, or psychological collapse. But Lilly didn't believe that. He had lived by one principle since his student days. If you want to know, you must experience it yourself. And so, in 1954 at the National Institute of Mental Health, he built his first isolation tank, a dark, airtight chamber filled with body temperature saline water. A breathing mask allowed the subject to float effortlessly, suspended between wakefulness and oblivion. Lilly volunteered to go first. As he lowered himself into the tank, the world simply disappeared. Within minutes, he could no longer tell where his skin ended and the water began. His heartbeat became thunder. The darkness was infinite. At first, a wave of terror flooded him, a primal fear of the void. But slowly, something inside him shifted. His thoughts quieted. The fear dissolved. Time unraveled. Then came a strange sensation, as if he was leaving his body behind, floating freely through space without sound, form, or boundary. When he finally emerged hours later, his colleagues expected confusion, even psychosis. Instead, Lilly was glowing. He spoke with quiet awe about the experience, a journey inward, emerging with something vast and intelligent. He said he had touched another layer of awareness, one that existed far beyond the limits of his individual mind. To him, this wasn't delusion, it was discovery. Word of his experiment spread like wildfire. Some hailed it as a revolutionary window into human consciousness. Others accused him of crossing the line between science and mysticism. Even the government took notice. Intelligence agencies saw potential in sensory deprivation as a tool for interrogation, control, or mind manipulation. Lilly refused them all. The mind, he said, was sacred. His tank was meant for exploration, not control. Over the years that followed, Lilly returned to the tank again and again, spending hundreds of hours floating in silence. Each session peeled back another layer of consciousness. Sometimes he drifted through vivid visions. Other times, he felt an indescribable unity with reality itself. To him, these weren't hallucinations. They were glimpses of truth, filtered through the noise of the brain. Artists, philosophers, and scientists soon came to see for themselves. Some found enlightenment. Others emerged shaken, swearing never to return. But all agreed on one thing: no one left unchanged. By the late 1950s, John C. Lilly's name had spread far beyond academia. Admirers called him a visionary, a man exploring the final frontier between mind and matter. Critics called him reckless, a genius who had stepped off the edge of science. But even they couldn't ignore what he'd done. The isolation tank had forced the world to face a question it could no longer avoid. What is consciousness when the world falls From neuroscience to the search for non-human intelligence. The isolation tank had opened a doorway in John Lilly's mind. Floating in total silence, free from the body's limits, he began to wonder whether other forms of life might already exist in that state naturally. Beings who lived, communicated, and perhaps even thought in ways beyond human understanding. Dolphins captivated him. They were mammals like humans, yet their brains were nearly as large, and their movements carried an elegance that seemed almost spiritual. To Lilly, they were more than animals. They were potential equals in consciousness. He wanted to know if their minds held the same awareness that stirred in his own, and if so, whether two species could ever truly speak to each other. In the early 1960s, Lilly founded the Communication Research Institute in the Virgin Islands, a place where humans and dolphins could live and interact together. He built special pools designed not just for study, but for connection. His dream was radical: to create a bridge between two intelligent species through patience, empathy, and sound. For years, he and his team recorded dolphin vocalizations, analyzing their clicks, whistles, and pulsing rhythms. What they discovered was astonishing. These sounds were not random. They followed complex, almost linguistic patterns. Dolphins could imitate human tones, respond to gestures, and even invent new sounds as if experimenting with dialogue. It was as though two worlds, long separated by evolution, were beginning to find a shared language. Lilly often said that empathy was the real instrument of discovery. Without compassion, he believed, intelligence and other beings would forever remain invisible to us. The more time he spent with dolphins, the more he came to see them not as subjects, but as partners, mirrors reflecting back humanity's own search for consciousness. His work quickly drew international attention. Scientists, writers, and filmmakers traveled to his institute, eager to witness what many call the dawn of interspecies communication. Some dismissed it as idealism, but others left the island transformed. The idea that another species could think, feel, and communicate on a human level began to reshape how the world viewed intelligence itself. Though Lilly's journey would soon move into stranger, more controversial realms, his years with the dolphins left a mark that science could not erase. He had stretched neuroscience beyond the laboratory, into the waters of empathy and imagination. To him, the dolphins were not research subjects. They were teachers, reminding humanity that consciousness may exist in countless forms, waiting only for us to listen. The descent into the infinite mind. By the late 1960s, John C. Lilly had mapped territories of the mind few had even imagined and reached across species to touch another form of intelligence. But for Lilly, the search was far from over. The isolation tank had revealed the edges of perception. The dolphins had shown him connection beyond language. Yet he still felt a vast mystery beyond reach, a final truth about the nature of consciousness and the architecture of reality itself. To find it, he turned entirely inward. Lilly began spending long, solitary sessions inside his isolation tanks, stripping away every boundary between himself and the universe. What he experienced inside those silent chambers was unlike anything science could measure. He described drifting within an endless sphere of light, or falling through layers of existence, as if consciousness itself were an infinite spiral. These journeys became his descent into the deepest realms of the mind, an odyssey that would define the rest of his life. From these explorations, Lilly developed what he called the levels of consciousness, a map of awareness that charted the inner landscape like an explorer marking unknown shores. At the highest levels, He reported feelings of radiant unity and joy, where the self dissolved completely and all creation became one. He spoke of golden light, timeless peace, and boundless love. But beneath those heights were the darker, minus states, realms of confusion and fear where he faced everything he had ever denied. To him, those descents were not punishments but necessary trials, the shadow side of enlightenment. Lilly documented every phase with scientific precision, treating each vision as data rather than dream. He wanted to chart the mind as if it were a new continent waiting to be mapped. Out of thousands of pages of notes emerged a kind of psychological cartography, a guide to the dimensions of human awareness. Every emotion, every vision, every terror, he wrote, was part of a larger system that could be known only through experience. Then, in one of his deepest dives, Lilly claimed to have made contact with something extraordinary, an unseen intelligence he believed was guiding his life through coincidence. He called it the Earth Coincidence Control Office, or ECCO. It wasn't a being, he said, but a vast organizing intelligence that quietly shaped reality. To him, the universe itself seemed alive, arranging events and encounters as lessons for human growth. Coincidences were no longer random. They were messages from the hidden machinery of existence. Lilly came to see ECCO as a mirror of consciousness itself. It responded, he said, to belief and intent. When you acted with clarity, love, and curiosity, ECCO worked with you. When you acted from fear or ego, it reflected chaos back. It was, in his words, a school for the evolution of the soul. His writings from this period fascinated some and bewildered others. Yet many of his insights echoed ideas that cognitive science would later begin to explore, that perception shapes reality, and that the mind is not a passive observer, but an active creator of the world it perceives. For Lilly, this was not a theory. It was a lived truth. He believed that by changing one's beliefs, one could literally shift between parallel realities. In his later reflections, Lilly described one vision that captured the essence of everything he'd learned. During meditation, he saw infinite versions of himself radiating outward across time and space, each living a different life based on a single altered choice. He realized he could step into any of them at will. He called this state alternity, a realm of infinite parallel worlds. For Lilly, this was a final revelation. Reality was not fixed, but fluid, an ocean of possibilities molded by consciousness. He had begun as a neuroscientist studying the brain circuitry and ended as a philosopher of the infinite mind. In his final years, he urged others to question their own perceptions, to look within rather than beyond. To him, the greatest frontier was not outer space. It was inner space. And in that space, he left a legacy that still challenges science and philosophy alike. Reality is not something we observe. It's something we create.